Hello, everybody. My name is Sridhar Muppidi. I'm the CTO for IBM Security. I'm joined by my colleague Abhijit Chakravorty, who leads the competency for security within IBM Security Services. Abhijit, many organizations are embracing a journey to cloud. This is in addition to what they're already doing with on-prem security. So as you can see, they're moving to a world of hybrid cloud security. As they do that, there's a lot of advantages of that, but also it comes with a lot of risk. Today, what we want to do is to demystify the topic of hybrid cloud security so that we can give you an approach and some examples for you to get started on your journey. One of the things that we notice working with a large number of clients is that many of the clients are fairly nascent or fairly early in the journey to cloud. You can see that almost 80% of the workloads are still on-prem. And one of the main reasons is that customers are concerned about security. Almost 90% of the issues that we hear is due to security. And when we talk about security, it's not just the security of the on-prem or one cloud, it's a combination that customers have to bring together. Security that is distributed, security that is shared, but the customers still own the responsibility. Abhi, I want to bring you in, let you talk about some of the work that you've been doing with our customers. What have you been hearing from our clients on this topic?
Sure, Sridhar, and hello, everyone. As you mentioned, Sridhar, some of the challenges that our clients face on their journey to hybrid multi-cloud starts with understanding the shared responsibility model between the responsibilities that a cloud service provider enacts, the responsibilities that our customers have, and the responsibilities that they share with their service partners, with the independent software vendors, many of whose technologies secure our clients. Understanding who does what is key. However, what's equally important is the accountability ultimately rests with our clients, even though the responsibility is shared. Another challenge that our customers talk to us about is the need for complying with the fast-moving regulatory challenges across jurisdictions, and what does it mean in terms of controls implementation and the ability to be evidencing security against regulations. A third example, if I may, is the need and the capability to adopt secure by design principles when businesses move to cloud, and how should this be governed, be operated most effectively and efficiently. Sridhar, how about you? What are some of the other challenges that clients are talking to you about?
Yeah, I think you've covered a good number of topics, but the one thing that I hear in addition is that threat management, Abhi. As you can tell, security is now delivered from multiple places within hybrid cloud, and customers have to understand the events which are coming from Azure or Amazon or their own on-prem capabilities, be able to understand those, detect those threats quickly, and remediate them even more quickly. So that's one area that we see as well. Now, moving forward, this can be a fairly daunting task, being able to think about security and extending it to cloud and referring to the hybrid cloud. So what we've done is we simplified that with a framework that you can all use as a way to think about cloud security and an opportunity for you to keep up with the pace of business transformations. The framework is basically three pieces. Number one is the business side, which is to make sure that understand all the regulatory requirements, defining the set of controls with some prescriptive mechanisms, and then managing that. This allows customers to demonstrate compliance, manage their risk, and governance. The second piece in blue is a technical piece. This is where we have the opportunity to go and protect the workloads in a hybrid cloud. Identity management, access management, data security, network security, all of these have to be combined with some new thinking like zero trust approach to ensure that the right individual has access to the right resource under the right conditions. And then the second part of it is to continue to monitor that in case we have some changes in the configuration, detect those changes, and then make sure that they're remediated fairly quickly and automated. The last piece is the culture. As Abhi said, we have a number of people touching on security. It's a distributed capability, it's a shared responsibility. So the third piece is more of a cultural aspect of shifting the security concept to the left and infusing security as a part of DevOps so that you are protecting the application, the transformation right from the get go all the way into production. So, what we want to do in this discussion is spend a few minutes on each of these topics, give you a mechanism to think about this framework, and some example that we've seen from a client perspective. The first one is managing risk, and especially when you're dealing with large number of regulatory requirements. Regardless of what industry you're in, automobile or financial or healthcare or insurance, we are all subjected to a set of regulatory requirements. They start with a set of global standards like PCI DSS or ISO, as well as some of the industry standards like NIST and CSA. In addition to that, depending upon where the transformation is, where the application is being deployed, a set of local regulations also come to bear, depending upon which geography you're in. And these requirements and these regulatory requirements are changing on a fairly fast pace, keeping up with the threat landscape, right? The requirements are getting very granular. It's not at a high level, but be able to get to the very detailed level to demonstrate compliance. And the last thing is the request for compliance and audit is also changing to be fairly frequent. And when you combine all of these things, it could be really, really hard for somebody to start going on a journey to cloud, especially when they have a set of products as well as third party and fourth party risks to consider. So, what we've done is we put together a framework to help address that, make it easier, and provide a mechanism for a continuous compliance. We call this a continuous compliance framework. The idea is you're not going and generating a report every time there's an audit, but having a state of continuous compliance and getting notified only when bad things happen. At the bottom of the picture, you see the global as well as what we call the base controls. And the second layer, you see the local controls that we talked about in a previous slide. For a typical organization, when you combine those, it could be a really huge number. What we do is we basically use machine learning and other analytics techniques to be able to make those controls specific for your organization, specific for the industry, specific for the geography, so that you're able to deal with only what you need to deal with. For example, on this slide, you see in one example that Abhi and team have worked on, they're able to take this whole bunch of controls and distill it down to 280, spanning across 7 different focus areas and 21 different control families. And that's a huge benefit. Once we have that, then we can use technology as a way to implement these controls during development lifecycle, during configuration, or during management or production. A number of controls get deployed, and you constantly check on those controls to make sure that if something changes, you go and correct them. If you take this approach, it becomes really easy to demonstrate business value very quickly. Business value of risk, compliance, and governance, and be able to mitigate that risk. Not only the risk for your organization, but also third party and fourth party, which is becoming really, really important based on the recent threats that we have seen in the industry. Abhi, can you take us through the example that I referenced over here?
Sure, Sridhar. So for a major retail and investment bank who wanted to ramp up their cloud adoption, but were uncertain about the regulatory impacts of moving workloads and data in cloud, and were equally uncertain about the right governance model to execute the same. We helped with the compliance framework, Sridhar, that you just talked about. And we started with first aligning our controls, which is based on the NIST SP 800-53, to to the local regulatory and data protection laws that the client had. This was the ELM controls uplift. We then took this consolidated controls framework and evaluated this against the bank's existing control set, about 147 of those. And that led to identifying gaps between the current and the target control set. And with those, we then ended up defining mitigations, introducing new controls when necessary, either introducing new processes or changing existing processes where necessary. Once we had controls and gaps mitigated, we then assigned responsibility and accountability to govern the controls implementation between the various stakeholders, the bank themselves, their service partners, the cloud service provider, etc. We then translated these controls into technical implementations that you see on the right side of your screen. Technical controls implementation across the public and private hosted environments. By leveraging capabilities that deliver on cloud security posture management, or CSPM, we help the client establish a continuous process that automated security and compliance against these frameworks and controls. The end result was a clear controls framework aligned to the bank's unique needs, driving technology and process implementations that could be monitored and measured centrally, enabling the bank overcome the initial inertia towards rapid cloud adoption. Now, let's take a look at the technology implementation layers in more details, starting with a data-centric approach to security. Now, in the modern world with cloud adoption, the way we generate, consume, and process data has changed. In the digital era, data is the new oil. We know it, and unfortunately, our adversaries know it too. This makes securing confidential and sensitive data paramount. Adopting a zero trust approach to data-centric security enables just this. And the zero trust approach enables the right identity, have the right access to the right data under the right conditions. Now, let's double click on this to look at an architecture-based pattern for adopting data-centric security. And this really is about defense in depth, enhanced with context, the conditions that we talked about earlier, and all to prevent malicious actors, unauthorized users from accessing data, and ensuring only the right actors or processes consume data and under the right circumstance. And this is best done by starting with knowing the wheres and the whats of the data, and then designing a set of preventive and detective controls across network, identity and access, application security, and data protection based on, again, the context of the data, the identity, and the context, and ensuring that there is governance around threat management processes throughout the cycle. Now, Sridhar, you have advised clients on this zero trust approach yourself. What are some of the outcomes that our clients have seen as a result of embarking on this journey?
Yeah, this could be a fairly daunting task, especially if you look at a slide like this, where do I start, right? Most customers are picking a specific domain and ensuring that we have the coverage across the rest of the environment. In this case, the specific client started with identity and access management. They had more than a dozen Active Directory forests, different identity contexts for their cloud provider, different identity contexts for their SaaS provider. So they had to bring all of that in so that their workforce had a consistent source of truth as they're accessing applications, as they're accessing, not just, applications, but different servers and resources with least privileged capability. You don't want to give more than what you need access. So that's where we started with modernizing the workforce access. And then as they matured their environment, they extended this thinking to consumer identity, right? This is where some of the principles do apply, but in addition, it also becomes really important to balance the usability with fraud protection and threat protection. You want to minimize the friction for the end user. So what this client has done is to build on top of that unifying identity fabric and add adaptive access capabilities. Things like taking advantage of not just a user identity, but also the device identity, the network identity, the context of the environment, the context of the transaction, the behavior, so that you're evaluating the risk on every transaction and subjecting the user to the right level of friction. This is zero trust in play. And you can extend that to even the privileged access, which is where some of the common attacks happen, where you're infusing the privileged access, not just for the human beings, but also the application access, API access, etc. So in this case, the customer is able to unify the identity and access management layer and start on the journey for zero trust. On the other spectrum, we have another customer who is doing similar things across network and identity, but also looking at protecting data from a holistic perspective. As Abhi said, data is sprinkled everywhere, on-prem, in the cloud, structured data, unstructured data. So the first thing we have to do is to discover the data. Where is my data, right? And then once you discover the data, and that comes with talking to databases, talking and for different SaaS providers, cloud providers, as well as watching the network so that we understand where the data is living and how it's moving. And then we apply the right level of analytics and machine learning to understand the sensitivity and the risk of the data, how sensitive it is, right? What is the value of the data, so that you can then apply the policies to protect the data in the right way, protect to ensure that the right individual or the process has the right access, as well as protect in terms of encryption or tokenization. Having that sensitive factor provides an ability to then say, how do I encrypt this data? Do I encrypt this data by relying on the key management of the cloud provider? Or if it is very sensitive, should we look at something like keep your own key, where you have the key within your on-prem, encrypt the data, and store only encrypted values in the cloud provider? That way, even the cloud provider cannot see it. But you can't do it all in one shot. You have to basically take this approach of understanding the data so you can apply the right policy and then have it an efficient mechanism. Now, these are some examples of zero trust architecture in play. Now, once you define these controls, we have to ensure that they're continuously monitored to ensure that they are still in place. And if we find an anomaly, we need to correct them. But the reality is that security is delivered by multiple personas. As Abhi said, it's a shared responsibility. Broadly speaking, there's persona which is closer to the line of business, and there's a persona which is closer to the security office. They both have interest in securing the transformation. Although the line of business wants to accelerate on the speed of transformation, security is still important. They may not worry about the big picture, but it's important for them to do the basic necessary requirements and communicate with the security office for the broader security perspective for the organization. Now, it's important to set such guidelines in play for an organization. Now, if you look at underneath this picture, a simple picture like this, there's a whole bunch of products. We talked about posture management, right? We talked about workload protection. We talked about DevOps and a set of tools which make up the DevOps. In some cases, we talked about identity management and data security, and Abhi mentioned even threat management. Typically, that's a huge number within an organization. What we hear from our practitioners is somewhere around 80 different products from 40 vendors that they have to stitch together. It's a huge task. There's not enough people to do that. There's too much of data, there's not enough time, and there's too many tools. Cloud gives an opportunity to do things differently. Organizations have to look at a platform-based approach versus a product-based approach. A platform that can bring all of these different security products together, whether they are homegrown or whether different vendors or different vendors delivering different capabilities, they have to come together, safeguard your investments so that you can derive some outcomes for the organization. The platform has to be multi-cloud because, as we talked about, hybrid is about not just what's in your on-prem, but also in cloud. And in many cases, it's not one cloud, it's more than one cloud sometimes. The platform has to be open because there are many vendors in the market today, and each of them provide unique value. And our job is to bring it together, right? Either you pay the cost of integration or use a platform like this, which is open, so that you're safeguarding the investments and bringing all the events into one place without necessarily bringing the data. The platform has to be simple because many personas touch upon this platform. And we need to make sure that even if somebody who's not very conversant with security can work with security capabilities. And last but not the least, the composability is important because every customer situation, every organization is unique. You want to differentiate from your competition as well. As a result, you have to take a certain amount of capabilities from vendor, your own capabilities and risk assessment capabilities, bring them together so that you can derive the best value out of this platform. When you do these things, you derive some great outcomes, like that holistic data security we talked about a few minutes ago, or threat management. Let me give you an example of one customer who has gone down this path of threat management and used a platform approach for a full threat management lifecycle. They started with connecting different products together. Their Azure Sentinel, they have an instance in Amazon, their on-prem security, their EDR, which is the device endpoint device protection and response, all of these together so that they get the complete visibility across their hybrid environment. Once they did that, then we use analytics as a way to improve on the accuracy of detection so that you're not reacting to every offense because there's too many of them, but doing the analytics to make sure that something is really worth looking at. Once you know that, then we can use techniques like federated search and federated analytics to accelerate the investigation. You can accelerate by not bringing all the data into one place, but defining an analytics that basically goes down to different repositories of security, do the appropriate searches, analytics, and brings back the results so that you can quickly assess if something is good or bad. And of course, you know the rest of the story, right? If something is not good, then you want to quickly respond. But by adopting a platform-based approach, an open approach, you can use things like Ansible that can help you automate the response in a fairly quick manner. So as you can see, a platform approach can help you with the full life cycle of visibility, detection, investigation, and response.
And Sridhar, not only does this platform-based approach facilitate full threat lifecycle as you just described, it also enables controls and compliance management across the workload ecosystem, wherever the workloads are, on-prem, hybrid, multi-cloud, which leads us to our fourth pillar. So what's a scalable practice that can deliver on the data-centric security approach alongside continuous threat and compliance management, and that allows the prescriptive controls that we had talked about earlier to be governed and managed? Well, to do all of this in the modern world, we should embrace DevSecOps, infusing security and privacy with DevSecOps. So a successful DevSecOps adoption really starts with knowing what's most important to drive this change. And that's empowering and enabling your people to foster a culture of security across the digital business lifecycle. And the people here are not just developers or infrastructure engineers, but others who make up the various personas that Sridhar had described earlier. Your lines of business who's driving the digital agenda in your company, your risk and compliance functions who design and monitor guardrails, your enterprise architecture functions capabilities. So let's walk through the development lifecycle of a business service. So during the plan and design phase, security should be a consideration right when a new service or a new feature function within an existing service is being conceptualized. Because after all, a new application could be a potential new attack surface. Think of all the risks to this new app, all the compliance mandates that the app and the data it processes have to adhere to, and design and build a reference architecture feeding security backlogs based on this risk modeling. And then as an agile culture and process moves towards coding and building, the applications must implement security controls. And that's not just on the application stack, but also on the underlying cloud and on-premise infrastructure stack, knowing full well that the applications might well need to be portable across multi-hybrid clouds. Building automated security into the CI/CD pipelines during the deploy and enforce the release cycles is key. And designing release cycles with tool chains that check whether the application has been hardened, there are no unnecessary open ports, default configurations have been changed to custom, and whether the target landing zones are secure is key. And then finally, with monitoring and responding or continuous monitoring and responding to events that these applications experience in production or other environments is a key facet. And ensuring that the security controls are able to prevent threats, detect threats that couldn't be prevented when one such were to occur, and then responding to threats based on context forms the final pillar. And all of this ensures that the application and the data that these apps process adhere to the compliance baselines that had been set up earlier. By enabling a culture of thinking security everywhere, thinking security early, organizations will shift left on security. And of course, this results in security failures being detected early. And as we all know, remediations of failures detected early are a lot more cost effective than detecting security failures much late in the life cycle, perhaps just prior to a production rollout.
Yeah, thank you, Abhi. I think this is great. So we have spent a lot of time in talking about a variety of topics. And as we said earlier on, right, approaching the hybrid cloud security could be a daunting task. Let me try to bring it together before we wrap up. This is a fairly complex framework, but we want to take one step at a time and go about it from bottom up. End of the day, you're trying to deploy a number of different workloads, applications, and data on a variety of different types of infrastructure, whether it is on-prem, whether it's cloud, or in the future, even edge. And these workloads could be either containers or non-containers, functions, or even some of the traditional applications that may be running on Unix or mainframes. All of these have to be secured as a part of your transformation. That security comes in three aspects, as we discussed. Number one is that blue layer, which is the technology layer, identity and access management, network security, and data security. All of those capabilities have to come together in a manner that you have to demonstrate or provide security and compliance, as well as manage the ever-growing threat landscape with security operations and threat management. These capabilities need to be infused throughout the lifecycle of the DevOps, not just once an application is deployed in production, and that's when you think about security. That's a bad practice. But be able to infuse the security at various phases, as Abhi was talking about, shift the security left so that it helps you not only address threats quickly, but also save on huge costs. It also helps you with the cultural transformation that the organization has to go through, where you have multiple personas touching on security, and DevSecOps becomes a common language for all of us to talk to each other. Once you do that, the right things has happened at the business level, which is the top layer, right? We are able to go and demonstrate compliance and manage the risk of an organization, have the governance, provide a mechanism for service management and operations, as well as have the continuous business operations. You can not only address these business objectives, but do it in a manner that is modern, like adopting a zero trust framework, or be able to deal with shared responsibility concept, address some of the shortage that we have in skills and change the culture, etc. So I hope you use this as a framework to get started on your journey to cloud. Before we wrap it up, quickly giving you some pointers. First and foremost, this is a very complex topic, right? And there's a lot who have gone ahead of you potentially in this journey. So it may be good to leverage some of the expertise. There's a lot of good best practices published in this space. It may be good to go and leverage it without reinventing the wheel. We've also given you a couple of links to help provide more of a workshop-based approach in terms of co-creation, as well as leveraging some of the community resources out here. Both Abhi and myself would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and share our experiences. And I wish you the best on your journey to embrace cloud. Thank you.
Thank you.